Good evening, and welcome to Twilight Tales. Tonight, let yourself drift away with the story of Cleopatra, a queen of unmatched beauty and power, whose love and cunning swayed the fate of Rome and Egypt alike. Get comfortable, breathe deeply, and allow this ancient tale to lull you into sleep. Chapter 1. The Roots of the Nile. Part 1. Birth of a Dynasty. The first rays of dawn filtered through the fine linen drapes of the Memphis palace, bathing the room in a soft golden light. In the hushed silence of the royal alcove, a new breath awakened Egypt to its destiny. The Nile, flowing below, murmured its millennial legends, while the reeds rustled under the caress of a gentle breeze, carrying grains of sand and distant promises. In that moment, the world seemed suspended. The air vibrated with sacred chants intoned by the priestesses, and each vibration resonated against the polished stone like a call to the harmony of the elements. At the center of the room, a chiseled bronze cradle rested on a black marble pedestal. Its slender supports evoked the petals of an unfurled lotus, a symbol of renewal and purity. Inside, draped in purple fabrics and finely woven golden threads, Princess Cleopatra opened her eyes for the first time. Her gaze, imbued with a remarkable wisdom for her young age, met that of the high priestess who, with a solemn gesture, presented her to the assembled cortege. Wisps of myrrh incense rose beneath the canopy, enveloping the room in an intoxicating fragrance, while a silver sistrum softly chimed, marking the precise moment when destiny aligned with the stars. Around the cradle, Macedonian dignitaries stood upright, draped in ivory togas edged with purple, their gazes grave. Among them, Antipater, ambassador of the Seleucid kingdom, observed with a mix of respect and curiosity, aware that the child born that day would embody more than a mere heir. She would be the bridge between Hellenistic culture and Egypt's millennial tradition. Facing them, the priests of Osiris, dressed in immaculate loincloths and emerald belts, bowed their heads in silence, offering the newborn the blessing of the ancient gods. King Ptolemy then, his face marked by years of struggle to maintain his throne, stepped forward. Each step resonated with profound solemnity, as if the stone itself paid homage to his power. He extended his purple-gloved hand and gently placed his fingers on the child's head. In a deep, measured murmur, he uttered an invocation that vibrated against the stone columns. "O Isis, goddess of magic and motherhood, grant my daughter the foresight of the stars. O Horus, protector of kings, watch over her destiny. May her reign one day unite the peoples under the banner of peace." At that very moment, a rare celestial phenomenon acknowledged the royal vow. A comet with purple hues crossed the morning sky, leaving behind a silvery trail that none would soon forget. The astrologers, kneeling in the shadows, raised their eyes with reverence. According to their calculations, the trajectory of the sacred star heralded the birth of an extraordinary sovereign whose influence would extend beyond known borders to the very heart of Rome and Alexandria. The scene then took on an almost mythical dimension. Priestesses adorned with peacock feathers danced in a circle around the cradle, making their sistrum's percussion vibrate, while chants in ancient Coptic mingled with the Greek language of a solemn choir. Bronze torches cast gigantic shadows, giving the impression that ancient deities descended from the star-painted ceiling to behold the newcomer. Each drumbeat resonated like a universal heartbeat, tying the child's fate to that of all Egypt. Later, as the cortege dispersed and the clamor of the festivities faded, silence reclaimed the palace. The winds, now calmed, murmured only the faint rustle of veils, and the distant echo of bells from the hanging gardens barely pierced the air. In the adjacent chamber, Queen Cleopatra V, her face marked by the exhaustion of childbirth, smiled softly. Her features, both stern and tender, reflected the complex heritage of a people defying time. She gently brushed her child's cheek, placing a kiss filled with hope and ancestral secrets. The new princess, enveloped in silence, seemed to understand that her journey began long before her first steps. The immense frescoes in the chamber already told her story. They depicted the goddess Isis offering wisdom to a young girl, Horus raising his scepter above a throne, and at the center, an open lotus radiating golden light. The images, etched in stone, reminded all who gazed upon them that Cleopatra's destiny was sealed since the dawn of time. As Memphis awoke to the clamor of crows and the morning prayers, the Nile flowed, tireless and eternal, carrying within it the memory of all queens, kings, and conquerors. In its waters, it was said that the voices of ancient pharaohs whispered, imparting their counsel to those who knew how to listen. This river, an abyss of legends, would be the silent witness to the trials to come, the alliances forged in the dust of caravans, and the conflict shaped by the ambitions of mortals. Thus began the story of Cleopatra, woven into the very fabric of gods and men, an odyssey that would one day breach the walls of Alexandria to shake the foundations of Rome. The world could never have imagined that a child born under a purple comet would become the last queen of a millennial empire, the guardian of a secret capable of altering the course of history. Part 2. The Heart of Egypt. The monumental gates of Memphis opened onto a world in turmoil, where the golden dust of the desert mingled with the heady scents of ylang-ylang and cypress. From her cradle, Cleopatra already sensed the powerful breath of the kingdom, the pounding of horses' hooves, the clinking of bronze shields, the hoarse chants of Syrian merchants announcing the arrival of their shimmering silks. Each stone of the ramparts vibrated with this teeming life, holding in its memory the conquests of kings and the revolts of vassal populations. Near the temple of Ptah, hooded priests moved like shadows, offering statuettes of protective deities to the faithful, while the haunting sound of a tambourine punctuated the precise movements of sacred dancers. Beneath the dome, where a cool draught circulated, Cleopatra, swaddled in a light fabric hijab, was carried by her governess to the great inner courtyard. There, a polished copper basin reflected the perfect lines of columns adorned with hieroglyphs recounting the epic of the Ptolemies. White water lilies floated on the water, exuding a crystalline fragrance, and each leaf seemed to caress the surface, inviting the child to lose herself in the liquid mirror. The sun's rays, filtering through the arches, played on her soft skin, as if teaching her that the entire kingdom was reflected in her nascent eyes. As she explored these sacred spaces, The deep voice of the royal historian Calixenes guided her to a monumental stele. The engraved characters recounted the mythical founding of Memphis when the spirit of Ptah shaped the world with his divine hands. Calixenes brushed the symbols, his eyes gleaming with erudition. Here, your lineage finds its roots in stone and magic. Every pharaoh from the first lords of the desert to your Hellenistic ancestors has maintained the bond between men and gods. You, future sovereign, will be the link uniting the past to the future. The words, carried by a respectful silence, resonated in the young princess's heart, awakening within her the weight of a name both protective and feared. The days followed an unchanging rhythm. At dawn, the royal herald traversed the city to proclaim the king's decrees, while artisans, under the watchful eyes of overseers, crafted offerings of stone, gold, and ivory. Cleopatra watched, fascinated, as the bronze chisels struck granite, the crystalline chant of linen weavers, and the taut pulling of silk sails on looms. Each sound, each scent, imprinted itself in her memory like the fragrances of a dream she would one day learn to decipher. At noon, the vast and unyielding Nile offered a different scene. On its banks, barges laden with wheat descended toward Alexandria, while fishermen wrapped in purple veils cast their nets in wide arcs. The lapping of water against the hulls resonated with hypnotic softness, and the sight of these boats drifting toward the horizon gave the impression that the entire kingdom floated on a golden ocean. Egyptian merchants haggled fiercely over the price of grain, while Syrian smugglers, lurking in the shade of palm trees, whispered exchanges of gold ingots for spices. Cleopatra, draped in a white linen cloak, observed this ballet, already sensing the breadth of her future domain, a world of infinite riches, but also of fragile balances. As the sun declined, a clamor rose from the suburbs. Greek gladiators rehearsed their duels, sharpening their blades and adjusting their bronze helmets. The crowd, gathered behind wooden railings, cheered each parry, each riposte. Slaves, heavily chained, performed ritual dances under blazing braziers, beseeching the gods for a shred of mercy. In this dramatic atmosphere, Cleopatra glimpsed the harshness of power and the latent violence beneath the kingdom's glittering surface. Already she understood that her role as queen would demand not only the grace of a goddess, but also the resolve of a warrior. At nightfall, oil lamps lit up the alleys, casting flickering circles of light on the mud-brick walls. Families gathered around modest banquets, sharing cumin bread, candied figs, and spiced wine. They sang ballads dedicated to Osiris, evoking his resurrection and the promise of life beyond death. In every household, the story of the gods intertwined with that of men, creating a universe where the sacred and the profane remained inseparable. Beneath the canopy of gold-embroidered drapes, Cleopatra, nestled against her nurse's chest, her face illuminated by the trembling glow of flames, listened to these ancient tales. Each word, each melody penetrated her being, forging within her the conviction that words would be her most powerful weapon for ruling. Thus passed the princess's first months in the beating heart of Egypt. The kingdom, vibrant with colors, sounds, and scents, had already instilled in her soul a silent ambition. Memphis, the cradle of her destiny, was the stage for an irreversible initiation. Day by day, Cleopatra learned to see, hear, and feel the soul of her people, those of slaves and priests, merchants and soldiers. In this microcosm of splendors and shadows, she patiently wove the threads of an empire she would one day lead to its most brilliant apogee. Part 3. Youth and First Stirrings. Under the soothing veil of a pastel morning, Cleopatra grew up to the unchanging rhythm of the Nile's floods, whose rising waters carried the promise of an abundant harvest. In the vast galleries of the palace, the marble floor echoed her soft steps, while the light filtering through lotus-adorned columns painted moving arabesques on the walls. Each dawn offered her a different scene. Clouds of butterflies swirling around the hanging gardens, a procession of peacocks unfurling their iridescent fans, and the metallic song of water balances capturing the gentle flow of the river. Raised between two worlds, Hellenistic and Egyptian, she studied Greek grammar under the deep voice of the scholar Aristander, whose immaculate toga contrasted with the yellowed scrolls he unrolled before her. He corrected her first attempts at verse, exalting the music of words, while beside her the veiled priestess Taos taught her hieroglyphic signs, those sacred drawings linking the living to the gods. In the shade of a sycamore, Cleopatra listened alternately to the fables of Homer and the myths of Isis, aware that each legend wove within her a thread of power and mystery. Her lessons were interspersed with moments of carefree play. In the inner courtyard, she fled the marble games of the pages to chase flamingos wading in shallow pools. Their vibrant pink and coral feathers brushed her eager fingers, while an Egyptian cat with a tiger-striped coat curled against her calf, purring like a harmonious choir. Sometimes servants brought her trays of juicy figs and bursting pomegranates, their ruby juice beating on her lips, reminiscent of the sacred color of bloodshed to honor the gods. In the silent corridors, she brushed against engraved steles, placing her small princess's gaze on the millennial stone. She imagined the silenced voices of pharaohs whispering forgotten counsel, and believed she heard the clinking sandals of Hatshepsut treading the sacred tiles. With each encounter with the stern faces of statues, a shiver ran through her, as if Egypt's soul spoke to her, guiding her toward an extraordinary destiny. She learned to listen to this inner murmur, to decipher omens hidden in the flight of birds, the shape of clouds, and the twinkling of stars. When the day's torrid heat fell, she took refuge in the royal library, a labyrinth of wax tablets and papyrus carefully arranged on cedar shelves. There, under the watchful eye of the scribe Philomela, she rediscovered the taste for knowledge. She memorized hieroglyphs that sang of life and death, the medical treatises dictated by Hermes Trismegistus to mortals, and astronomical scrolls revealing the paths of the planets. The heady scent of cedar incense mingled with the aroma of heated wax, creating a solemn, almost magical atmosphere where each breath seemed to nourish the mind with sacred energy. In the afternoons, the princess attended rhetoric lessons given by the young orator Pyrrhus, whose vibrant voice mimicked the timbre of an epic bard. He had her recite speeches inspired by Athenian philosophers and Roman senators, awakening in her the subtle art of persuasion and charm. Her words floated in the air, heavy with meaning and emotion, and Cleopatra learned to modulate her tone, tempering her passion to better captivate her audience. She understood then that words, wielded with skill, would be the most powerful weapon in her arsenal. At dusk, when the sky blazed with mauve and saffron, she climbed the outer walls to gaze at the city, pale under a twilight veil. The glazed tile roofs gleamed like mirrors, and the Nile stretched its smoky ribbon toward the horizon. The distant clamor of treasure-laden boats mingled with the plaintive song of sea sirens, legends from far-off coasts. In those suspended moments, her heart swelled with an elusive desire to unite peoples, to shape an empire where culture and commerce would weave an unrivaled network of influence. Her nascent emotion surfaced when, around the age of 10, she met her first companion in friendship and rivalry, Princess Arsinoe, a foreign cousin and daughter of the same royal blood. Their bond sparked during intellectual jousts. They challenged each other with riddles, claimed the most sublime passages of Homer, and strove to mimic the sound of reed flutes. But envy sometimes glinted in their eyes. Each dreamed of outshining the other, of shining under the gaze of noble onlookers. Yet, behind this rivalry, an unbreakable bond formed, rooted in a shared understanding of the weight of their heritage and the solitude cast by the shadow of the throne. Cleopatra's dreams, bathed in the darkness of her scented sheets, were populated by mythical figures. Isis spreading her protective wings, Osiris wielding the scythe of justice, and a crowned serpent with eyes gleaming like gems. Sometimes she awoke with a start, her heart pounding, carrying the vague memory of a divine warning. In these dreams, the Nile became a liquid mirror, alternating reflections of peace and storm, silently foretelling the trials to come. Then came the caress of a first awakening to love. During a ceremony on the riverbanks, she met the gaze of a young Etruscan noble, part of a diplomatic mission negotiating wine and oil trade. His smile, discreet yet sincere, kindled a new warmth in her. Their exchanges were measured gestures and carefully chosen words, blending patrician Latin and elegant Greek, until Leander, the noble, offered her a bracelet woven of gold and lapis lazuli, a symbol of a fragile but vibrant bond. For the first time, the princess felt the sweetness and pain of nascent passion, destined for the discretion imposed by her rank. Thus concluded her initiation into the art of the world, a subtle alchemy of knowledge, legend, and emotion. In the shadow of the palaces, Cleopatra learned to navigate the fragile balance of power and heart, secretly forging the maturity of a sovereign who would one day bend history to her will. The first embers of her ambition stirred quietly, ready to set the world ablaze when the time came for the crown. Chapter 2. Crowns and Conspiracies. Part 1. Ascension to the Throne. The desert winds swept through the corridors of the Alexandria Palace, carrying a procession of dust and murmurs. The first flames of dawn brushed the massive silhouette of the lighthouse as the city awoke under a steel sky. In the throne room, Corinthian columns entwined with bronze glyphs cast dancing shadows on the black marble floor. There, gathered in a silence heavy with tension, Macedonian dignitaries ascended the sacred steps, priests draped in white, generals in leather adorned with hieroglyphs, and ambassadors from distant kingdoms. All awaited the fateful moment when the heir of Ptolemy XII, barely 16, would take her place on the ancestral seat. Since the previous night, the king's death had been sealed as a whispered secret in the shadows of the alcoves. A sudden illness, perhaps a poisoning, orchestrated by the court's enemies. The Greek physicians, with evasive glances, had tried to conceal the truth, casting a shroud of discretion over the banners. But the people, sheltered in their low mud-brick houses, sensed the unease. The gold panners at the port, leaning over the Nile's silence, saw the lantern's glow fade on the waters and understood that Egypt's fragile balance had just wavered. At the heart of the room, the immense polished sycamore throne, inlaid with lapis lazuli and gold, seemed to await her reign. The armrests, carved in the shape of graceful sphinxes, held the promise of a sovereignty both formidable and sensual. Above, a purple brocade canopy, edged with solar motifs, let the first rays of the rising sun filter through. In this chiaroscuro, Cleopatra's slender silhouette stood out. Her papyrus bark robe, woven with silver, hugged her slender waist, while her diadem, set with garnets and pearls, captured the light and sent it back in incandescent bursts. The high priest Psenon, his voice deep and slow, declared the opening of the sacred assembly. The distant howls of jackals, echoing in the bay, accompanied each syllable, as if underscoring the gravity of the moment. Ribbons of golden incense smoke rose, tracing serpent-shaped volutes in the air, a symbol of divine protection. At that moment, Cleopatra stepped forward, the pearls of her headdress swaying to an imperceptible rhythm. Each movement seemed calculated, imbued with the confidence and inner strength she had forged throughout her youth. O Cleopatra, daughter of Isis and Sobek, heir of the Ptolemies, intoned the priest, receive the scepter of your ancestors, and may Ra, Osiris, and Horus engrave your name in eternity. He extended toward her an ebony staff topped with a golden scarab and a lunar crown set with emeralds. Silence fell, heavier than granite, until the held breaths of the ambassadors broke it. Then, with a steady hand, she grasped the royal insignia. A shiver ran through the assembly, as if the stone itself recognized her legitimate power. The sacred drums rolled, answering the priest's prayers, while a choir of female voices sang an ancestral hymn. The words, incomprehensible to many, whispered the genesis of worlds and the union of opposites, the high land of Greece and the low land of Egypt, the fertile water of the Nile and the ardent fire of the desert. With each refrain, the young queen closed her eyes and let this mystical connection resonate within her until her chest vibrated like the belly of a great divine drum. Behind closed doors, conspiracies were sketched in the shadows. General Gabinius, whose loyalty wavered between Alexandria and Rome, whispered with Pothinus, the unofficial regent and master of the royal coffers. Their murmurs spoke of sending messengers to Octavian and Mark Antony, as if to bury Roman influence in Egyptian intrigues. But none dared openly betray the sovereign, so radiant was her authority. When she reopened her eyes, Cleopatra paced the throne room, her dark eyes sweeping the scene like an oracle probing souls. A movement rippled through the crowd, The southern barons, proud of their Nubian lineage, bowed their heads, while the notables of Memphis, eager to preserve the old order, followed suit, signaling unity and respect. She then spoke the first words of her reign in solemn Greek, subtitled by scribes in Demotic for the people. I swear to preserve the harmony of the Nile, to defend the tradition of the gods, and to ensure the prosperity of every citizen, from the humblest fisherman to the proudest Pharaoh. Her voice, deep and measured, resonated in the hall like a promise of balance, yet revealed a vibrant flame ready to ignite any resistance. At the ceremony's close, the people of Alexandria thronged before the palace balconies. The human tide, draped in colorful fabrics, waved papyrus and olive branches, symbols of peace and victory. Chants rose, blending ancestral Coptic with Greek accents, an echo of the past and a celebration of the future. Cleopatra, perched on the marble, responded to this acclaim with a calm gesture, a slow raising of her hand, granting her benevolence to the frenzied crowd. Yet, in the shadow of the porticos, Roman emissaries observed in silence. They knew this ascension was not merely a transfer of power, but the opening of a new chapter in the struggle for influence between Egypt and the Republic. A single glance sufficed. Antony, with his square brow and jet-black beard, noted every detail. Octavian, more discreet, memorized the image of a young, determined queen. Their ambitions would now play out at court, in diplomatic feasts and secret alliances. When the sun reached its zenith, the first royal audience opened. War councils, trade negotiations, and customary law judgments would mark the early months of her reign. But in that moment, as the clamor faded and the columns regained their silence, a breath swept over the throne, that of a sovereign ready to defy history, to negotiate with gods and emperors, and to make Egypt the cradle of her legend. Thus ended Cleopatra's ascension to the throne, a prologue steeped in mystery and majesty, heralding fragile alliances, subtle betrayals, and burning passions that would soon set the Mediterranean ablaze. Part 2. The Games of Power. After the fervor of her ascension, the palace sank into a more subdued atmosphere, where every corridor became a field of silent maneuvers. Cleopatra glided between immaculate columns, clad in a pale blue linen tunic, while her advisers followed at a distance, scrutinizing for any sign of fatigue or hesitation. In the great peristyle, the pools shimmered under the harsh daylight, and the water lilies floated like coded messages, white for peace, pink for passion, purple for authority. From morning, she received provincial governors in turn. The satrap of Cyrene, veiled with concern, pleaded for reduced port taxes. The strategist of Cyprus negotiated the island's remilitarization, and representatives of the Greek coastal cities contested the growing dominance of Roman merchants over oil and wine warehouses. Cleopatra listened in silence, her fingers brushing the chiseled edge of her scepter. When she spoke, her deep, poised voice weighed each word. Sometimes a mischievous smile, sometimes a furrowed brow, sufficed to remind them of the balance of power. In the map room, a vast wooden panel covered the far wall, depicting the Mediterranean studded with city-states, contested islands, and potential enemies. At her side, the secretary Epinetos adjusted his wax tablets, ready to record every line of the next directive. fortify the ports of Berenice, launch a reconnaissance expedition south of Nubia, authorize a convoy of ships to bypass Crete to evade Roman surveillance. When Cleopatra pointed to a quill stroke, a shiver ran through the room. It was an act of will, the signature of a meticulously crafted strategy. To solidify her authority, she improvised a private banquet at the heart of the palace, gathering 80 influential court members, satraps, generals, priests, and merchants. The U-shaped tables groaned under cups of spiced wine, plates of fish marinated in cedar oil, and baskets of exotic fruits. Blue glass-walled torches cast a warm glow, while a quartet of lyres played a melancholic tune drawn from Eleusinian chants. Cleopatra, seated at the center, sipped orange blossom-scented mead slowly, observing the budding alliances. To her right, General Ganymede, hero of the Nubian campaigns, conferred with the Indian ambassador, under the secret veil of the Elephantine emperor, discussing a pact for ivory and ebony supplies. To her left, Pothinus, the regent, spoke in private of loans contracted from Syrian cities, presented discreetly as an example of financial prudence. The priests of Khonsu invoked the moon to ensure nocturnal protection, while Alexandria's philosophers debated the harmfulness of imported Parian marble. In this diplomatic dance, every smile and nod carried a political subtext. Between bites of candied dates, Cleopatra occasionally rose, pacing the room with a light step. Her footfalls cracked the tiles, a subtle reminder that she set the tempo. A guest ventured a suggestion. "Majesty, send an emissary to Rhodes to secure the allegiance of the sailors." She nodded, inviting the speaker to continue. When someone dared suggest seeking Cicero's support, she let out a softly mocking laugh. "Why beg for the friendship of those who already fear my shadow?" Faces tensed. The warning was clear. But behind the banquet's facade, Rome's shadow loomed. Spies galloped along coastal roads, reporting every exchange to their masters. The ships of the 44th Legion, anchored at Pselcis, watched for any cedarwood shipments useful for building galleys. And in the palace alcoves, Gabinius prepared a missive to Mark Antony, proposing the alliance of Arsinoe, the queen's younger sister, in exchange for recognition of Ptolemaic power over Cyprus. At dawn, Cleopatra summoned her inner circle to the Emerald Chamber, a private sanctuary where green stone walls cast a soothing vertigo. There she outlined her plan: strike a treaty with Cretan pirates to harass Roman convoys, while launching a series of theatrical performances celebrating Alexandria's splendor and its role as a cultural crossroads. The light laughter that rose was suddenly tempered by the gravity of her gaze. "These games of power," she explained, "are not mere verbal jousts. They are the key to our survival." In that velvet murmur, all understood that the young queen had learned to navigate the traps of diplomacy, wield gold as a weapon, and use cunning as a shield. The Nile, flowing below, remained impassive, ready to irrigate the fields of victory or sweep away the builders in its capricious currents. And in the palace's hushed silence, one could barely hear the muffled echoes of carriages racing toward embassies, signaling the continuation of a silent war where empires and their puppets clashed. Thus, in the Queen's corridors, the first round of a merciless tournament was played, where every ally could become an enemy, and every smile a potential betrayal. Cleopatra, far from ceremonial pomp, shaped Egypt's destiny with the edge of her will, ready to transform the games of power into a mastered symphony. Part 3. The Roman Ally. The October sun set over Alexandria, pouring a golden and purple dusk over the glazed tile roofs and the labyrinth of quays. In the port, the waters of the Lethe, a stream parallel to the Nile, lapped against the hulls of a Roman fleet, heavy with salt-stained sails. The air, laden with sea spray and spices, carried the low rumble of anchored galleys, ready to unload Rome's might. Cleopatra, draped in a white silk cloak embroidered with silver thread, waited on the palace terrace, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the prow of a ship, taller and more majestic than the others, emerged, that of Gaius Julius Caesar. As the skiff approached under the sculpted arches of the aqueduct, its captain called the queen's name in a hoarse, solemn voice. Cleopatra, surrounded by guards in delicately chiseled armor, descended the marble steps in silence, each step resonating like a silent decree. The ropes groaned under tension, while a potent scent of incense and myrrh wafted from the palace, enveloping the visitor. At the foot of the jetty, she faced the Roman general, his muscular frame beneath the toga, his neatly trimmed beard, his piercing eyes seeking truth in her dark gaze. Their hands brushed hesitantly before clasping in a firm, respectful grip. Her name, pronounced in Greek with a deep timbre, resonated like a spell. "I am Cleopatra," she said, "Queen of Kings and Mistress of the Nile." Caesar bowed his head, as if before a living oracle. The wind rose, casting silver ripples on the water. A solitary ibis skimmed the bridge, an androgynous messenger of Isis, presaging a union that would defy the world's order. They ascended side by side into the palace's opulent halls. Purple drapes absorbed the light of oil lamps, while mosaics sparkled with shards of glass and semi-precious stones. Around them, the muted chorus of their advisors muddled languages. Greek translators, Egyptian secretaries, and Roman lictors exchanged nervous glances. Cleopatra signaled to dismiss the advisors, imposing an intimate circle. Silence fell, heavy with stakes, punctuated by the crackling of torches and the rustling of heavy drapes. In a measured gesture, she pointed to a low table where an ivory tray inlaid with lapis lazuli held aromatic wine goblets, pressed black dates, and spiced honey. She invited Caesar to taste, observing the tension bead on his features as he brought the fruit to his lips. "Every drop of this wine," she murmured, "has crossed the orchards of Ennis. Every date holds the secret of Siwa's oases. To walk beside me, you must understand the homeland of these flavors." He, a fierce Roman, felt a shiver run down his spine. In the palace's cradle, Cleopatra wove a pact of sense and sensibility. Their discussions soon drifted to the battlefield, the debts contracted by Ptolemy the Othecan with the Republic, and the fragile balance of the post-Pharsalus legions. Caesar's voice, sharp and methodical, echoed against the onyx walls. "I come to propose an alliance," he explained, "not as a master, but as a partner. Rome will recognize you as the legitimate queen if you agree to forgive your debts and supply provisions to the eastern garrisons." Cleopatra tilted her head, her gaze alight with a fierce glint. "My soldiers will guard the kingdom's granaries. My ships will open your maritime routes. But remember, General, I am neither vassal nor bought friend. My loyalty is won, earned, and preserved by honor. A sacred silence greeted these words. The torches flickered, casting moving shadows on their faces, as if the gods themselves hesitated to judge. Then Caesar flashed a half-smile, revealing a newfound assurance. "May the gods of Egypt and Rome seal this pact," he replied. "You, the philosopher queen, I, the statesman general, together we will write the future of the Mediterranean." As their hands joined a second time, the distant echo of a sistrum sounded in the neighboring hall. The priests had begun a ritual honoring Isis and Jupiter, blending the metallic percussion of tambourines with the depth of a Roman horn. The sound rose, spreading through the galleries, then breached the grand atrium's columns to reach the roofs and alleys. The people, leaning over the ramparts, thought they recognized the sound of a new era. Before the night deepened, Cleopatra led Caesar to the balcony overlooking the lighthouse. There, the sacred flame flickered at the tower's summit, casting its beams toward the open sea. The offshore breeze lifted her hair like a halo, and the sea drew its promises toward infinity. She placed her hand on his arm, whispering an incantation. "May this light guide our steps, and may the Nile sing at our side." In the water's reflection, they saw their silhouettes stretch, intertwined like two united shadows. When Caesar departed for Rome, escorted by light galleys, Cleopatra lingered long, gazing at the Black Sea, where the ship's silhouettes dissolved. She knew the Roman alliance granted her unprecedented power, but also placed her country under the Republic's scrutinizing gaze. The stars lit up one by one in the inky sky, and it was said that night, Isis and Vesta whispered together, deciding the fate of mortals. In the zephyr's breath, destiny began its grandest chapter, weaving betrayal, passion, and ambition on the living stage of the ancient world. Chapter 3. Loves and Storms. Part 1. The Passion of Caesar. The oil lamps cast their reflection in the palace's marble pools, tracing flickering arabesques on the walls that seemed to dance to the rhythm of Cleopatra's heartbeat. That night, the queen awaited Caesar in the gallery of black columns, each capital carved with the image of a falcon, symbol of the god Horus, and a laurel, a tribute to Jupiter. The scents of cedar and myrrh incense swirled in the air, mingling with the subtler fragrance of her own hair, infused with rose and jasmine. When the great door opened, a breeze swept through the long corridor. Caesar entered, draped in a purple toga edged with scarlet, his step assured, his eyes gleaming with a mix of curiosity and admiration. In the torchlight, his face took on a new dimension. The conqueror's stature transformed in this intimate glow into softer, almost artistic features, as if contemplating his muse. Cleopatra, draped in a silver robe embroidered with gold thread, leaned against a column. Her gaze welcomed him like a storm sensed before it breaks. Without a word, they began walking side by side along the corridor. Beneath their feet, polychrome stone mosaics depicted scenes of battles and feasts, each figure, each tessera, seeming to vibrate under the intensity of the growing silence between them. Only the measured rhythm of their breaths and the soft rustle of fabrics resounded. In the shadows, a group of servants held their breath, as if the slightest intrusion would shatter the fragile alchemy. Reaching a balcony, they faced a sea stirred by a sirocco's breath. Waves crashed in phosphorescent crests, while foam slid against the lighthouse's pilings, sparkling with jagged reflections. Cleopatra leaned on the stone balustrade, extended her hand, and let a white papyrus leaf fall into the void. She watched the wind carry it away, wild with indescribable joy. Caesar placed his hand over hers, enveloping and gentle. "Your trust carries me further than my legions," he murmured. Their whispered words held the strength of ancient oaths. He spoke of Rome's memory, the victory at Pharsalus, the weight of his years and conquests. Cleopatra, in turn, evoked Alexandria's hanging gardens, the wisdom of Hermes Trismegistus, and the omens she read in the stars. She spoke of her people, her love for them, and her fear of betraying her land by loving a foreigner. With each confession, their faces drew closer, and the air, saturated with salt and incense, vibrated with electric tension. When Caesar gazed at her, he caught a new spark in her eyes, the flame of an enamored sovereign, ready to seal a pact of flesh and soul. He gently drew her to him, the warmth of his body making her shiver like a leaf in the night breeze. Their lips brushed, hesitant, before uniting in a kiss both tender and burning, like the meeting of the desert and the sacred fire of Hephaestus. Around them, the column's shadows stretched like silent giants witnessing the miracle of their union. They remained entwined, lulled by the sea's murmur and the distant song of the Lethe's sirens, convinced that the world could collapse around them. Nothing mattered more than this moment of eternity. In an almost ceremonial gesture, Cleopatra removed the pearl necklace she wore, sliding it from her neck to place it between their joined hands. The pearls rolled, capturing the lamp's glow. She murmured, "This is my kingdom." Then, reaching into his toga, Caesar drew a bronze ring engraved with the Roman eagle. He slipped it onto the queen's finger. "And this is my oath. No matter the conspiracies simmering in the halls of power, the frantic messengers racing to Rome, the golden chains woven by ambition. Beneath Alexandria's firmament, two sovereigns sealed an alliance stronger than any human law, one of love, made of passion, combined strategies and promises whispered to the gods' ears. They returned to the gallery, their steps now lighter as if carried by a new intoxication. Behind them, a slave extinguished the lamps, plunging the palace into a soft darkness where only the scent of myrrh and the floating echo of their voices remained. Caesar brushed Cleopatra's cheek. "Let the stars bear witness," he said. She offered him her most secret smile, and as dawn began to pink the clouds, they vanished into the royal apartments where passion would soon be written in invisible pages destined to defy time. Part 2. The Shadows of Rome. The folds of an onyx veil fell over Cleopatra's chamber, while the full moon cast its silvery rays through intricately carved shutters. Beyond the palace's thick walls, the Nile glided in silence, carrying distant echoes of a world the queen was beginning to fear. Roman couriers, intercepted by her spies, brought news heavy with betrayal. The Republic, under the Senate's anxious eye, worried about Caesar's growing influence in the East. The corridors of Alexandria, once alive with the tumult of feasts and diplomatic prose, were now crossed by furtive shadows, distant echoes of conspiracies woven thousands of miles away. In the heart of the Eternal City, the Forum resounded with fevered debates. Cassius, with a cutting voice, demanded the death of the foreigner who had become master of Rome's destinies. Brutus, more reserved, feared for civil peace, aware that any act of violence would be an admission of weakness. Marble steles stood alongside statues of victorious Caesars, and the Mediterranean wind seemed to carry the conspirators' murmurs, slipping between Corinthian columns like a slow poison. In taverns, whispers spoke of Caesar's return to Rome, the triumphal entries he planned, and the omnipresence of his purple toga on the Capitol steps. Cleopatra, seated in her jade cabinet, held a papyrus scroll sealed with Pompey's mark. She caressed the seal, aware that each fold of this message could decide her kingdom's fate. Sometimes she pressed her ear to the table, listening to the rustle of the unrolled papyrus, as if the slightest tension in the fiber revealed an omen. Bronze torches cast a play of dancing lights on her face, giving her features the air of a fateful goddess. Her eyes, already versed in intrigue, gleamed with a vigilant glow, half curiosity, half defiance. In a whisper, she summoned her closest adviser, Theodotus, master of the royal archives. In the secrecy of a peristyle with slender columns, they deciphered the text's veiled allusions together, sealed alliances, forgotten debts, and the promise of Caesar's triumphal march on Rome, defying any tie with Egypt. As Theodotus transcribed the names of hostile senators, a shiver ran through the room. The shadow of a falcon carved on a capital seemed to come alive, its wings opening a space of silent menace. Yet Cleopatra remained unshaken. She ordered urns of frankincense and styrax placed in every antechamber to purify the air and prevent evil from taking root in minds. The priestesses of Sekhmet, in black veils with resolute hearts, marched in file, tambourines in hand, invoking the vengeful goddess who would crush any conspiring hand. Each of their percussions resonated like the announcement of a divine sentence, reminding anyone who dared raise a hand against the queen that Egypt's gods watched, implacable. When the Roman detachment escorting the delegates arrived at the palace, accompanied by lictors with grim fasces, Cleopatra received them in the map room. There, the ceiling painted with constellations seemed to open a celestial vault, where she could read the stars' paths. A sky streaked with white lines indicated the moon's course, announced as an accomplice to those working in the night. The Roman envoys, uneasy, remained silent before their hostess's prestige, awaiting her response to the Senate's injunctions. She raised her hand, caressing the parchment with a slow, calculated gesture, then spoke words heavier than swords. "I respect Rome's history and the memory of its people," she said in polished Latin, "but I cannot accept that my people's freedom be weighed against your interests. Rome will always be welcome in Egypt, but under my aegis and according to the laws of the Nile's land." Each syllable seemed to widen the chasm between her and the rugged emissaries, while the crystal chandeliers trembled as if shaken by an inner quake. The doors slammed shut behind the Romans, carrying away a mournful silence. In the hanging gardens the fountains wailed, and the lapping of water on porphyry basins resounded like a shock wave. Cleopatra, her gaze fixed on the pools and nocturnal jasmines, felt Isis's presence at her side. In a breath she whispered a prayer in ancient Coptic, imploring the mother goddess to grant her the strength to resist the growing shadows. Back in her chamber, the woven palm fronds of her bed quivered under a mysterious breeze. She lay down, but barely slept. Her dreams were haunted by the silhouettes of Roman conspirators, stone statues more alive than life, brandishing daggers. At dawn, sunlight filtered through the drapes, and she awoke with the certainty that action was needed. Without hesitation, she ordered the mobilization of swift galleys, not for war but to convey emissaries to Rome itself, bearing rare gifts, illuminated papyrus, Libyan desert pearls, and stuffed Cayman kings to astonish the nobility. In the secrecy of the grand ships, a diplomatic expedition prepared. Couriers, laden with carefully weighed words, would cross the sea to affirm that Egypt was not a Roman fief, but a sovereign kingdom. And as the sails swelled under the eastern wind, Cleopatra, from the lighthouse tower, gazed at the liquid expanse, ready to send her defiant voices among Rome's marble palaces. Thus, under the Republic's menacing shadows, the queen wove her web of diplomacy, cunning, and spectacle. She understood that it was not the might of legions that ensured the balance of empires, but the strength of the stories told within them, tales of honor, ritual sacrifices, and promises etched in the hearts of men. And in the palace's vibrant silence, it was said that each torch flame carried a coded message ready to light the path of a sovereign determined to make Egypt not a prey but a living flame that would consume the illusions of those who thought her subdued. Part 3. The Embrace of Antony. When Alexandria's sarcophagi revealed their millennial secrets to curious minds, time seemed to pause. A formidable fleet, with black sails edged in gold, glided over the Nile's tranquil waters, bringing to the city one of Rome's three triumvirs, Marcus Antonius, his face weathered by the dust of eastern campaigns, his bare arms polished by effort, both dove and thunderbolt. As he approached, the waters shimmered, capturing the palace's reflections as if to herald a meeting that would defy history. Antony stepped onto the quay, escorted by his Praetorian guard. Under a canopy of embroidered scrolls, Cleopatra awaited, adorned in a purple tunic edged with chaluba motifs, her braids arranged in a complex headdress evoking the coils of a sacred serpent. The wind, laden with spices and humidity, played with her veils, and the intoxicating aroma of lotus floated around her. When their gazes met, it was as if two worlds collided and merged at once. They greeted each other without words, in a language older than all diplomacies. Antony removed his sheepskin cloak and placed it on the queen's shoulders, like an oath laid on the god's altar. She placed her hand on his forearm and murmured in delicate Greek, "Welcome to your home, where every stone bears the shadow of Pharaohs." He bowed his head, his throat tight, and replied in Latin, "It is by your side, O Cleopatra, that I have learned the weight of power and the taste of freedom." They ascended to the upper terrace where a lavish banquet awaited. Rose marble columns supported a starry ceiling painted in fine gold, evoking the Memphis sky, and bronze candelabras diffused a warm light. Around them, Egyptian and Syrian musicians united, ethereal lutes vibrant reed flutes, deep drums. Their chords wove a sonic tapestry where Roman echoes blended with Oriental modulations, crafting a polyglot melody. At the table, dishes paraded in a majestic procession, roasted pigeons stuffed with dates and almonds, grilled rays drizzled with cedar oil, clusters of black grapes on vine leaves, and a goblet of spiced wine flavored with rose and coriander. Cleopatra invited Antony to taste a grape, peeling it with the delicacy of a priestess offering a sacred ornament. The juicy pulp burst on his lips, and he saw in this simple gesture the symbol of an alliance sealed in the intimacy of the senses. Their conversations, initially cautious, soon ignited. He spoke of weary legions, the Parthian threat rumbling beyond the Euphrates, and the intrigues woven in Rome by those who feared his power. She responded with confidences about unexplored Nubian temples, the oracles of Siwa's sanctuary, and the power of dreams governed by the Nile. With each word, the intensity of their gaze deepened a well of intimacy, reflecting both the geography of empires and the topography of their souls. Suddenly, a crash resounded. The Nubian troops, the queen's guardians, aligned on the terrace, their shining halberds and ostrich plumes fluttering, as if to remind that this moment of ecstasy was also a political act. Antony rose, struck his fist on the table, and invited the soldiers to admire the young sovereign. In the trembling light, each blade gleamed, and the metallic echo resounded against the columns, underscoring the porous boundary between feelings and armies. Returning to Cleopatra, Antony pressed his forehead against hers, an immense offering of vulnerability rarely tolerated on battlefields. She closed her eyes, let a silent tear fall, then loosened her fingers to let him slip a ring onto them, a circle of blackened gold engraved with Mark Antony's monogram and his imperial eagle. The gesture, more than a jewel, was a silent oath. They were united for eternity, defying heaven and earth. They ventured into the hanging gardens, carpeted with jasmine and mandrake, where aromatic chimneys spread a colored mist. The fountains gurgled in a hushed silence, and the dew deposited iridescent pearls on the leaves. There, under an arch of pure roses and blood-red gladioli, their lips met in a long, deep kiss, laden with promises and fatal catastrophes. Each musical note seemed to pause to listen to the rhythm of their union, each breath counting as an incantation of love. Beyond the palace walls, Alexandria buzzed. It was said the port's fish were more numerous, the sky bluer, and the ancient statues vibrated with joy. Astrologers secretly announced a rare conjunction of Venus and Saturn, a sign that conflict-ridden loves give birth to imperishable legends. Antony, trailing his fingers over the petals, leaned in and whispered, "May the stars jealously guard this pact. May our enemies tremble before the strength of our hearts." When the night reached its peak, they returned to the throne room. There, Nilotic priests had set up a white stone altar adorned with golden scarabs. Cleopatra poured sacred Nile water onto it. Antony added a handful of Delphic dust. The two elements mingled in a light bubbling, creating a bluish halo, the final ritual of their union sealed by Isis and Jupiter. A sistrum chimed, a drum rumbled, and a distant Roman horn echoed the sacred commentary from the east. In this cradle of sounds and lights, their silhouettes stood out against the starry canopy, Two royal figures ready to defy fate. They gazed at each other one last time, silenced by the intensity of their passion. Then, hand in hand, they retreated to the private apartments, where the echo of their steps resounded like a warning. The most powerful love forges the most dangerous alliances, and only a queen could dare to define the limits of the heart. Thus ended Antony's embrace, a prelude to a flamboyant epic where the dream of a Roman East was born in the flesh of two lovers, and where the shadow of conspiracies already began to unsettle the palace's stones. The Nile, never tamed, carried away the echoes of their oath, ready to return it one day in the form of an imperial legend. Chapter 4. Twilight and Legend. Part 1. The War of Empires. The August sky tore apart in white lightning as Octavian's outposts appeared on the horizon, cresting the arid hills of Actium. At dawn, the distant song of cymbals and the deep roll of drums swept through the Roman lines, aligned in tight ranks on the left bank of the Ambracian Gulf. The soldiers' red-plumed lances gleamed under the harsh light, forming a sea of scarlet points, while clouds of banners snapped in the wind, bearing the August sign, Octavian's bust encircled by a silver laurel. On the opposite shore, the Egyptian galleys and Antony's triremes, arrayed in a protective semicircle, awaited the order to weigh anchor. Cleopatra stood on the deck of the Arethusa, her flagship galley, its prow carved with a palm, its black sails edged with gold, like a raven's shimmering wing. She observed with her dark eyes the enemy formation. Over 300 ships, armed with bronze rams and catapults. Around her, Egyptian officers pored over nautical charts, pointing to the estuaries where the Gulf's fresh water mingled with the Ionian Sea's violent currents. A sirocco's breath, laden with sand and spray, lifted the trains of her purple linen cloak as if heralding the storm. Antony, draped in a sweat-stained purple toga, approached her. His voice, hoarse with emotion, rang in the salty air. "My queen, the winds are against us, and the gods hesitate between our fates. Osiris or Jupiter, who will wield the sword of victory?" Above them, an eagle swooped onto the masts, crying its unanimity over the waves. Cleopatra clasped her gold-gloved hands and murmured an oracle in ancient Coptic. "May Isis's spirit guide our first charge, and may the moon veil her tears. For we sail not only for love, but for the supremacy of empires." The signal was given when the Egyptian galley's moorings snapped under tension. A war cry rose from the Ptolemaic ranks, mingled with the clamor of Antony's loyal eastern legionaries. The ships glided over the water like a pack of ravenous beasts. Bronze rams struck enemy hulls in a clash of sparks, and rope ladders hoisted combatants to the surface. Jets of oily fire launched by catapults ignited orange bursts on wooden decks, sparking crackling fires that devoured masts up to the stays. On land, Octavian watched the battle from a steep hill, his soldiers in marching order, ready to disembark if the naval clash favored Antony. He contemplated this titanic deployment, the crescent lines of light and dark ships intertwining like dragons vying for the sea. In his hand he held a parchment, the speech he would deliver to the Senate, boasting of the foreign queen's defeat. For now he let the sea decide his fate. On the Arethusa's prow, Cleopatra felt the brutal pitching like a wild horse shaken under an inexperienced rider. Egyptian soldiers armed with javelins and bronze shields tensed their muscles, while rowers, striking in rhythm, let their sweat drip into the blue sea. At the height of a Roman-decked frigate, a shrill trumpet blast pierced the air. The hour of melee approached. Archers perched in the crows' nests fired volleys of flaming arrows, tracing incandescent trails, while Roman catapults answered with stone boulders. The clash shook the holds. Cries of pain and shouted orders mingled with the dull discharge of catapults. An Egyptian soldier, his breastplate split by a stone shard, collapsed into the waves, dragging the oar and its rower into a black whirlpool. Cleopatra held her breath. She thought she heard Sobek, the crocodile god, roar beneath the hull. In a determined gesture, she brandished her sword adorned with a serpent symbol, exhorting the sailors, for Egypt, for glory. Antony, emerging on the deck of his ship tied to the Arethusa, raised a silver horn, a call for a general charge. His legionaries crossed the bridge, swords in hand, toppling Roman defenders. Their steps pounded the wood in a war rhythm like a sacrificial drum. The smoke from fires soon engulfed the deck, dissolving silhouettes into dancing shadows. In this chaos, Cleopatra and Antony advanced side by side, cutting through the melee, their courage radiating under the oil torches. When the wind shifted, blowing offshore and fanning the flames, the battle took a decisive turn. Roman ships, blinded by smoke, turned back or collided, trapped by their own line. The more mobile Egyptian rams seized the disorder to slice through enemy flanks. Cries of panic rose from Roman decks, while Greek fire poured in intense flames, consumed the rigging. The Arethusa, unscathed, stood at the center of a circle of charred ships, majestic and invincible. On the shore, Octavian, stunned, witnessed the debacle. His legions, still intact, awaited the order to march, but he knew the naval victory at Actium would seal the war's fate. In a rare gesture, he bowed his head in acknowledgment. The foreign queen had triumphed over Rome, and in the Sirocco's breath, carrying the scents of burnt wood and salt, he murmured softly, "Dio, we will return. The Nile does not eternally shelter dreamers." As night engulfed the bay of Actium, the Egyptian galleys returned to Alexandria's port, trailing the dying flames of wrecks. The queen, her diadem soaked with sweat and dust, emerged from the tumult, her eyes gleaming with a prophetic light. She gazed at the horizon, where the wave crests drew a trembling line. She knew this victory was but the start of a larger war, where magic, myths, and the relentless law of men would intertwine. In the growing silence, the distant echo of a sistrum resounded in a forgotten temple, and Isis's deep laugh seemed to mingle with the sea's rumble. The empires had clashed under the gods' ages, and history was already writing a new chapter, bathed in blood and flames. Part 2. The Fall of the Last Pharaoh. The black waves of night enveloped Alexandria's walls when the rumor of Actium's defeat reached the hanging gardens. The Nile, calm and vast, seemed to hold its breath under the star-studded celestial vault, while the queen, draped in a dark purple cloak, walked slowly among the fragrant laurels. Around her, Sekhmet's priestesses busied themselves rekindling smoking lamps, as if the vengeful goddess could still fend off the inevitable. But the air was heavy with the acrid smell of dried blood and the fire of charred ships, burning memories of a battle Egypt had lost. At the first light of dawn, Octavian's galleys ascended the canals, imposing their barrier of metal hulls before the quays. The bronze rams gleamed under a pale sky, menacing. Archers posted on rooftops fired flaming arrows to intimidate, and the clamor of Roman legions pounding siege towers resounded like a death knell. The inhabitants, huddled in their homes, awaited silence, aware that each moment stolen from fate brought the shadow of submission closer. Cleopatra gathered her last allies in the throne room, a vast alcove with sycamore columns and bas reliefs evoking past victories. Around the purple canopy, Eastern generals and Nubian satraps stood upright, faces closed. In the flickering torchlight, the queen spoke in a grave voice. "We are but 12,000 souls against 100,000 legionaries, but our land is the oldest of magics, and Egypt will not bow to fear." Her gaze swept the room, kindling a final spark of hope in their hearts. Yet, as Roman war horns tore through the air, Antony's alliance crumbled. The remaining ships, entangled in nets and debris, drifted, victims of the sea and contrary winds. The great general, wounded by dishonor and consumed by shame, withdrew to private apartments, fleeing the soldier's gaze and Cleopatra's icy pity. His voice, once thunderous, now echoed only in hallucinated whispers, and he surrendered to the torments of defeat. In the citadel the drums suddenly ceased, giving way to the clash of arms and shouted orders. The bronze gates opened with a deafening crash. Octavian's cohorts entered the city, dark forms advancing among broken columns. Roman standards floated above the towers, driving out Ptolemaic banners. Cleopatra, beholding this human tide, felt the weight of history crash upon her shoulders. A shiver ran down her spine, as if Isis's ghost whispered the end of a millennial cycle. Under the lictor's threat, the queen returned to the palace, her steps echoing in the empty galleries. The smooth marble reflected her wavering image, a dual reminder of her rank and her fall. She headed to the portrait hall, where the gem-encrusted faces of the Ptolemies stared at her in silence. In a final act of defiance, she tore down the plaque of Cleopatra the Fern, sealing the present with a symbolic gesture. The last heir rejected the foreigner's yoke at the cost of her own disappearance. Soon after, the news spread through the city. Marcus Antonius, driven by despair, had taken his life. He was found lifeless, his chest pierced by his sword, a final message traced in his blood on Cleopatra's breast. The wind scattered the letter on the cold floor, where it was trampled by Roman guards. The queen, informed of the tragedy, closed her eyes for a moment, as if to anchor the pain in her heart. Then, without trembling, she ordered a brazier of incense and a scroll of aspic, the sacred plant capable of carrying king and queen together into death. In the high chamber, tapestried with black velvet embroidered with gold, Cleopatra lay on her purple bed, clutching a small vial of concentrated poison. The scent of myrrh mingled with the incense volutes, while the moon cast an immobile mask on her face, more beautiful and terrible than life. When the doors opened, she did not flinch. It was Charmian, her faithful friend, somber in her white robe, carrying a cup of fresh water. In a breath the queen murmured, "Pour the poison, and close my head if I falter." The object slid to her lips, an invisible thread of destiny. The bitter nectar filled her mouth, burning her throat with white fire. She clenched her eyelids, a near serene smile brushing her lips. Around her the darkness thickened like a protective cloak. The ancient powers awakened one last time to accompany her descent into oblivion. The cup emptied, her blood slowly faded, and the queen, fallen sovereign, left this world in a silent breath under the gaze of those who loved or feared her. When the Romans entered the chamber, they found the motionless body crowned with a glittering diadem. Octavian, standing in the doorway, paused, struck by the solemn radiance of this royal corpse. "May she rest in peace," he murmured. It was announced that she would be embalmed according to Egyptian rites and displayed in Caesar's temple to remind the peoples of the grandeur and tragedy of a queen who dared defy the empire. But in the secrecy of the crypts, the priests hid the true body, leaving only the legend of an immortal to future generations. Thus ended the life of Cleopatra, Egypt's last pharaoh, whose fall sealed the end of a universe where gods walked beside men. Her legend, woven of passion, power, and sacrifice, endured in the hearts of poets, haunting the dreams of Alexandria and Rome, and forever vibrating in the memory of the Nile. Part 3. The Echoes of Immortality. After Cleopatra's disappearance, Egypt fell into a strange calm, as if the Nile itself held its breath. The first rays of dawn barely pierced the morning mist, casting an opal sheen on Alexandria's narrow canals. Barges glided without rowers, guided by the current alone, and fishermen, mute with emotion, let their nets drift lazily in the warm water. In the city, the royal palace's colonnades stood deserted. The ceremonial halls, once echoing with the queen's soft steps, remained frozen in solemn silence. The mosaics, covered with a light veil of dust, still sparkled with their multicolored tesserae, as if to remind passers-by of a kingdom's extinguished splendor. An Egyptian cat, the sole witness to the scene, slipped between the columns, its spotted coat gleaming in the shadows before vanishing into the labyrinth of faded gardens. The priests of Isis gathered near the main temple, draped in virgin linen, holding beeswax candles. Their prayer rose in a deep murmur, long and slow invocations calling on the mother goddess to welcome the last pharaoh's soul. Incense volutes ascended to the celestial vault, tracing fleeting spirals in the air. Each note of the litany seemed etched in eternity, as if time itself bowed under the faithful's piety. At the market, stalls remained strangely full. Exotic fruits, shimmering fabrics, gold and lapis lazuli jewelry. But no buyers approached. Merchants greeted customers with weary gestures, aware that nothing would ever be the same. Children, accustomed to the joyful cries of haggling, stood silent, gazing at the somber crowd like a broken dream. Only the distant clamor of a horn resounded, perhaps calling for a final homage or saluting a departure to an invisible world. In Alexandria's stadium, where chariot races once thrilled crowds, dust settled on the empty stands. No carriage sliced the air, no neigh broke the silence. The memory of past acclamations faded little by little. Only a few dried leaves swirled in the breeze, dancing nostalgically around lifeless triumphal arches. Even the wheat-laden boats, usually rolling their cargo inland, remained moored at the quay. Millers, clad in white tunics, gazed at the river, wondering if the Nile's floods would continue to nourish the fields or lose their purpose without the protective gaze of the beloved queen. Some claimed to hear in the water's lapping a chorus of absent souls, like a funereal chant mingled with the waves' roll. Yet Egypt would soon rise from its ashes. Roman generals, escorted by the Parthian legion, took possession of the palace, setting up makeshift camps. Armies, draped in bricks and togas, quarreled over the royal spoils, scattering treasures across the provinces. But as material power changed hands, the essence of Ptolemaic sovereignty slipped into myth. Alexandria's historians, gathered in the great library, began copying the works of Calixenes, Aristander, and Philomela, carefully preserving their accounts of the queen. Scrolls followed, describing her face, her speeches, and her stratagems. Scholars recorded the songs improvised at banquets, the oracles dictated by torchlight, and the words exchanged on the lighthouse terrace. Page by page, a legend more powerful than the metal of scepters emerged, that of an extraordinary woman capable of binding the fates of Egypt and Rome by the sheer force of her spirit. Poets, inspired by this memory work, composed odes in Egyptian and Hellenistic Greek, glorifying her alliances, her loves, her battles, and her triumph in the Cyclades. The verses praised her beauty, brighter than a lotus opening at sunrise, her voice softer than the murmur of water on the quays, and her courage broader than the Nile's floodplains. Each stanza was crafted like an offering, a tribute to the immortal Pharaoh. On the coast, sailors bearing the memories of Antony's expeditions guided their ships to new ports, recounting to Phoenicians and Cretans the feats of the queen who defied Rome. Rumors spread to Ostia's taverns and the Palatine's baths. Cleopatra, it was said, still haunted the lighthouse's sacred flame, offering counsel to sailors lost between sky and sea. It was also claimed she took the form of a silver ibis, soaring above hulls to guide navigators to safer waters. In the Delta's temples, the faithful placed flower crowns on Isis's altars, thanking the goddess for welcoming her and praying that she unite the queen with her pantheon one day. Silent processions traversed the canals, lit by painted glass lanterns where hieroglyphs whispered prayers in the darkness. Each floating lamp bore a wish that Cleopatra's shadow continued to watch over the kingdom and protect Egypt from coming storms. Centuries later, as the Roman Empire began to crumble, it was said that the last Ptolemy's soul resurfaced in the Nile's murmur, urging rebels to resist and sages to reflect on the value of power. Frescoes faded, some temples fell to ruin, but the queen's memory endured in popular songs, passed down through generations. Thus, the echoes of immortality spread, woven into human memory, the folds of scrolls, and the dance of stars. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh, became a living legend, resonating in poets' dreams and seers' omens. And if questioned, Egypt always answered with the same murmur. She still dances, in the Nile's waters and in the hearts of peoples. Between the tumultuous waves of the Nile and the marble corridors of Rome, Cleopatra was far more than a queen. She embodied the alliance of worlds, the fusion of political pragmatism and the sensual magic of the gods. Through her sharp intellect, enchanting words, and indomitable courage, she wielded scepter and seduction like two blades of the same sword, shaping an empire where culture and power echoed one another. Her destiny, illuminated by celestial omens and marked by legendary passions, shook the great powers of antiquity and rewrote the laws of power. Through her alliances with Caesar and Mark Antony, she demonstrated that true mastery lies not only in the strength of arms, but in the art of forging bonds, including those of the heart, to transcend borders. Unique in her Greek heritage and devotion to Egypt's soul, Cleopatra remains in our memories as the star pharaoh, whose radiance survived death. Her legacy between political grandeur and seductive myth reminds us that the most beautiful history is one where a woman's audacity can change the course of empires. Thank you for joining me tonight on this journey through history. I hope this tale has brought you peace and wonder. Don't forget to subscribe to Twilight Tales for more stories to guide you into a serene sleep. Take care and see you soon.